Sweet. All right, so we can get started. I got a lot on the agenda today. Again, thanks everybody. I do want to welcome both Andrew and Christian. I think this is your first meeting, right, guys?
Indeed, yes.
They're a result of the Russ Warren pestering and please give up some help before I stop bothering you. What strategy am I on? Yeah.
Yeah.
Seems to be working here at Threat Quotient.
I could be a real pain. Ask Rose; she'll tell you. So excellent. Thanks for joining us, guys. I really do appreciate it. And the reason that I've got you guys here is as you know, we all need that. We all need the help, and you guys are up to speed now, and I've got some great input. And I know, Andrew, you only have a limited amount of time, and I did want to give you a little bit of time to talk about some of your feedback that you gave me, which I thought was very valuable. The other thing I did want to mention is Mark is joining the group as well. We decided that there was only going to be one technical meeting going forward, not a technical steering committee meeting and a architecture meeting. So this is kind of, instead of calling it the architecture meeting, it's kind of a technical meeting, and we're just going to have the one. And the reason is as we move forward, there's going to be a lot of technical work to do on the ontology that Mark's leading up anyway. And then that way we can also prioritize how we focus on certain things between Mark and I, between what he's doing on the technical steering committee and what JK's doing on the governing board. And so, we have us all here so we can just kind of make sure we're all rowing in the same direction. I've talked to many of you about, how do we keep our focus on something that's of limited scope of value so we can all focus on one thing, get something done and achievable that's of value to the OCA without, getting too far afield on so many different topics. And so we're trying to do that here. And we always welcome advice and input. I know, JK, you now have a process that you have in place for other types of interesting topics that we could discuss. I don't know if you want to spend a minute talking about that here, but we're not cutting off any of those. We're just going to try and be myopic and focus with this group on a bi-weekly basis to get to the end of job. And I did create a chart to kind of lay out what that was. But JK, do you want to talk a little bit about what you're doing to handle these other ad hoc kind of interest groups?
Yeah, sure. I'll just talk about for a sec, just that this group knows what it is. So we're starting or hopefully going to be starting a series of discussions called the OCA Community Forum. And if you're subscribed to the OCA mailing list, you should have seen an invite for that go out in April 12th. The first conversation we're having, it's actually been brought to us by Ladrina from Cyber Reason. She wanted to have a discussion with the broader community around indicators of behavior, or IOBs, and how, first of all, what would be our point of view on IOBs? How do IOBs compare to IOAs? What's our point of view around sharing them, data modeling, et cetera, et cetera. So it should be a really interesting discussion because IOBs are a fairly, I'd say fairly more recent hot topic in the industry. So these calls, by the way, they're not restricted to OCA members. In fact, it's kind of the opposite. I'm hoping to, use these as a way to get more interest in what we're doing here, get more awareness of what we're doing here in the community by kind of broadcasting out that we're having these discussions. Yeah, so we're gonna have the first one in April. I think the very next one, based on some discussions we're having, is going to be around OT security, OT use cases. So, if you're interested in contributing to that, let me know. So we'll try to we would try to do one of those in May. Yeah, and that's it. That's really very informal, open discussion with the whole community around these topics, with an idea that we can get some fertile ground started to perhaps kick off groups in those areas, perhaps not. Like Russ said, we're all cognizant of, we don't want to spread ourselves thin, but at the same time, if there's folks who are interested in picking up something specific and running with it, we're not going to stand in their way. So anyway, that's what we're doing, just so that people know.
Perfect. Thanks for sharing that. That's excellent. So that's kind of one thing that I wanted to talk about. The other one I wanted to show here, guys, just for those of you new to the group, I just thought I'd step back and say, what are we trying to do here? I think I've given you guys some background, but then the whole idea is we do have an overview of the OCA architecture we've been looking at since last summer. We do have some nice use cases, and I did have some people update the use case. Thank you very much for that. Which is a malware detection use case. The whole idea is that allows us to scope our effort on the subset of the architecture. Let's lay it out. And then the reason why Mark and I are kind of combining forces here is we already know, based on some of the SCAP work we've done and some of the work we've just done here, that we have some ontology to do. We already know that. And what we're going to do is, given that as we walk through these pictures and use cases and talk about them in more detail, it'll be natural then to launch off and look at the current ontology, which we know needs updating, as well as the missing ontology, which we know we have. So the idea is, this is going to feed off to the ontology group to help us, start defining all of the work we need to do for those actions and responses. And the first thing I know that's going to be teed up, and Mark's going to talk about next week, is the OpenC2 and the collaboration we're doing with them and how that fits into the ontology we're doing here. We've already done some good work on that a few months ago. So we're going to start, refurbishing that and bringing that in here so we can align those as we then get into a deeper ontology, which we're going to talk about in a minute, as we drive through the graphs and diagrams we have. So that's the intention, is we'll continue to iterate on the ontology, what we need, make a list. We'll continue to iterate on those C4 diagrams that Adam, Bill, and Mitch put together, and now I've been drawing a few on the architecture. I do have a set of folks that are interested in the higher level picture, so I think that's going to fork off to one piece of work, and then the lower level picture is what we're working on now, which is the SIM, the SOAR, the threat intelligence along that line. We know there are things missing. And then the third thing was, if you remember, I had an architecture paper we started up at the end of last year. I'll get back to that because I also want to write down in more detail how things will work as we have these discussions, and we can document it, because diagrams only catch so much. So we'll use the architecture. So those three things, if you think about these biweekly groups, is what we'll be doing in these meetings. So let me stop there. Is that clear to everybody, what we're trying to do here?
Hey Russ, this is Adam.
Yeah.
I think it's clear to me. I don't know when a good time is to mention this, so I'll just mention it now because you were talking about the ontology and gaps and reworking it and all that kind of stuff. I did talk to, I think it was yesterday, there was an endpoint data collection call in the SCAP world. Good. And I did mention to them that, OCA kind of has this idea where that SCAP architecture work would start to inform the ontology to some degree. And I guess this is more of a heads up than anything else. So I mentioned it to them. Two, the immediate temperature in the room was basically, why couldn't the OCA people come here and then extract that information for the ontology? So there might be a little bit of, it just might be a little bit more effort to try to get people to participate in this venue on that front, if that makes sense. Sorry if that didn't make sense.
Okay, because I thought the intention was to try and take what we could that was relevant out of the SCAP to embellish and use here in the OCA. So
yeah, I think that is the intent. I think what okay. Everybody's feeling at this point is that they're stealing cycles to work on everything, and this is being viewed as stealing even more cycles to do something else.
So okay. If we created a proposal, do you think that they're looking that if we created a proposal, then we would bring it there on that call? Would that be, it sounds like, what would be more favorable?
I think that's possibly what they were thinking is, if OCA, if the people engaged in OCA are interested in having the SCAP architecture inform the ontology, that the OCA points of contact, whoever that might end up being, would participate in the SCAP working group to do that, like to accomplish that goal. That's what I heard. And I think that's
I
a good
think, yeah,
characterization.
I think that makes sense, and that probably should be. I mean, to me, that should be our default mode of operation almost, right? Like because we can't expect, if we want to go to make progress towards this goal we have of bringing some of these different groups and things together, right? Like SCAP and ICD and et cetera. We can't just expect everybody else to come and join us.
Right.
Like we have to it's like put up or show up, right? We have to go and bring our proposal to them in their forum and put in that work. So I think that makes a lot of sense to me. And Russ and I and Mark were talking about this, I think it was yesterday, about how, I think we should take this approach of just defaulting to these vocabularies, for example, whenever possible, right? Like, as opposed to creating something new and then doing mappings, like just default to the OpenC2 vocabulary in the ontology, default to the SCAP vocabulary in the ontology, so that becomes very easy to understand and consume. That's kind of my initial thought, and that and that's the first cut, right? So you can get people on board with what's happening, and then over time we can try to, where necessary, create more alignment around these things. But anyway, that's just where my headspace is, Adam. I don't know if you think that's
Yeah, no, that makes sense. I mean, it could go either way. I mean, I imagine that. So first of all, the default makes total sense, right? Like, yes, we should, because we're OCA, we're hoping people come here and help, but we should be first willing to go into their space, right? Like, go meet them where they are. If they're willing to come over here, then great, right? Like, I don't think we would ever say no to that.
Right. Right.
And in terms of defaulting to the vocabulary that you were talking about, I agree with that too. Like, why reinvent things and then map? It's just a waste of time, really. So,
Yeah.
I mean, that's fine with me. The concern I have, the only concern I have about that is who in the SCAP group is actually going to do the work, right? Right now, I think SCAP kind of views, I want to say Dave Kemp, and he's not on the call today. I think sometimes he's on this call.
Sometimes it is.
I think generally they view Dave Kemp as being the primary point of contact between the two groups. I'm definitely involved in the two groups, but I don't have cycles to do the actual ontology work.
So maybe as a follow-up, Adam, I should talk to Dave, because he's our point person. He's also the maintainers in the SCAP stuff. So
That's right. That's right.
maybe I'll talk to him about pivoting. As how do we make sure we have some kind of flow of conversation at the appropriate times and keep each other
Okay.
informed.
That sounds good.
I'll go follow up with him. I think that's a good recommendation.
Great.
Yeah, and I mean,
Thanks.
as far as the actual work and the stab at some of the use cases, SCAP's all publicly documented.
Yep.
It's still in a little bit of a flux, but it's fairly well documented, right? So, I mean, anybody should be able to pick it up and create something.
I mean, it depends on what you're talking about, right? If you're talking about SCAP content, yeah, that's well specified already. If you're talking about SCAP architecture, the endpoint data collection architecture, it's really notional at this point. So I don't know exactly how well documented.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know the architecture. I was more thinking of the actions. So, like, although, yeah, I guess that is informed by how the architecture ends up. But
Correct, right, exactly.
I mean, maybe this is, yeah. So if you think that that's still very much, maybe that's really the opportunity here, is for us to create a point of view and bring it over there. to influence that.
No, I'll pass that by, Dave. It's a great conversation to have, and thanks, Adam, for keeping the eyes on that, because we are trying to leverage what they've already done, but we've got to do it in an appropriate way that's synergistic with them. Yeah,
No problem.
because we knew that was a difficulty also, when we talked about the SCAP still going forward, even though we've got part of it over here, we knew that was also going to be a challenge. So I think this is an example of, how we have to be conscious of it going forward. Okay, so anyway, this is their object. I just put them here so you can see, and then and I just wanted to write down. I'll post this as well, but I thought it'd be worthwhile since we had a lot of new folks on the call to go through that. The other thing I wanted to do is I know I got a lot of good feedback from a lot of you folks on the diagram. Andrew, I don't know if you're up here, but I know you only have a limited amount of time. Do you want to kind of, you had a great initial exposure to what we had, and you had some good comments back. You and I had back and forth. Do you want to kind of share your perspective of what you saw in the architecture and some of the comments you had back?
Sure. And I don't have a particularly limited time today. I'm available. No worries.
Oh, good. Okay, good. I thought 30 minutes. Okay, great.
No. I'm good for however long you need me. So I have a background in mostly controls development, but also some with incident response and basically a threat research as an analyst. And I was just going through the info that you had sent me, which included, I guess, a kind of a use case diagram, use case text. Yes. And the first stuff that I was kind of going through is I was mapping through some of the diagram and the wordings there and the ontology that had been generated, for the block and other things, and the text. And there seemed to be, I don't want to say discrepancies, but the diagram did seem to go into a couple different actions in particular that were above and beyond what was in the use case. So I wasn't sure if that was something that had kind of been fleshed out through a previous discussion and then the use case hadn't been updated, or if things were just if there was some misunderstanding there. But I think particularly talking about some of the block actions, I think there was some kind of confusion between the blocking the file, which occurred during the phishing case, and then blocking the device as a quarantine measure. I think that was kind of the back and forth that we had where you had called out one specific section. I was like, well, that sounds like a little bit different thing. It's a good thing, and it's something the SOC analyst definitely could do. I could see that being if they had an NSDN setup or some kind of 802.11 or 802.x setup where they could do individual network authentication level stuff. Yeah, boot him into his own VLAN or whatever, or redirect his traffic. But just kind of wanted to make sure that got called out so that the use case was kind of in line with the diagram, and that we weren't going too far pushing one way or another. It does seem like the ontology and the actions defined are a little light so far. It's definitely, I can see where it's headed in one direction around the use case, but there's some things I was thinking of, just I think when they were talking about blocking, about quarantining, there are various different types of network setups, and I can imagine a case where the workstation that Bob was using wouldn't necessarily have a fully defined host name, and if he was in a routed network, MAC address might not necessarily be too useful there. Also, Bob's machine probably now, given how things work out, probably has at least 3 MAC addresses. One for like an onboard Ethernet, one for a wireless, and one for his dock. And at some point, those have probably got to be correlated together through some external network identity source, like a Active Directory or whatever. So there may be some UUID or whatever that defines the machine independently of its kind of network identity that you might want to block based on. Sorry, that was kind of a lot of verbal diarrhea there.
Oh, all good input. And just one I want to respond, and I've been doing an email with you, is we intend to update the use cases and the diagrams as we iterate, because obviously the points of view as we come together expand or embellish what we had originally written. So as I've told everybody, and people are starting to do that, go ahead and anytime you see something wrong with the use case, just go ahead and GitHub and open up an issue, or somebody already put a branch in and updated the text. That's fine too. I've had people doing that. So feel free, right? We know these things are going to be iterative as we go through these discussions. And the way we've been doing it up to this point for all of you that are new is go ahead, once you do your branch and edit what you're going to update. In these meetings, we'll just call those out. Hey, I added a branch. Here's what I put in. And then we can review it as a group, talk about it, and then either modify it or accept it into the GitHub. So that's how we'll iterate on this, both on the use case side as well as the diagram side. Okay.
Are you guys forking the repo first and off into your own repositories, or is there something that needs to happen to get contributor access so that you can create a fork?
Yeah, usually people are forking the repo and then doing a pull request over with the changes.
Fork and
Um,
pull.
and it's anybody can do a pull, anybody can contribute. You just have to digitally sign the CLA and you're good to go.
Yeah. And it'll prompt you for that.
That's great.
Yep.
Hey, can someone who doesn't understand this stuff ask, what does it mean to fork something? Since I hear it so often, I guess I'll go ahead and ask the smart people.
You make your own copy of it. In GitHub, you basically create your own copy of the repository, and then you can edit that. Your changes exist independently of the original ones, and then you submit a pull request, which basically says, hey, I have some updates, come and incorporate these into your copy, and then the changes kind of make their way back home.
Oh, so the polling and the pull request is you're requesting that somebody pull the changes that you made in your copy to put back into the master copy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's kind of a weird name, but in convention that Git has, I don't know where it originally came from. But yeah, you're making a request for them to pull your stuff as opposed to a push request. There is no such thing as a push request.
Right.
That I
No,
know
that's
of.
okay. That makes sense.
Yeah. I guess
Some people it's created
Forking
Git
is putting
and
your own
he's
copy.
finished.
Pull request is okay. Got it. And a Git. What? I guess while on the topic, what is a Git?
Linus Torvalds.
Git is short for GitHub, I guess.
Git
No,
is the
it's-
version control. Git is the version control system. GitHub is just a
Tool.
SaaS Git service.
Okay.
Yeah.
And
Well,
so
the way
Linus
it works-
created it. He named it after himself, much like Linux.
There you go. It's got to be famous. That's wonderful. So, Forrest, the good thing about doing that fork, and then as you pull it, once you set the pull in, we can all see what your deltas are, and then that gives us a chance to look at the changes, and that makes it clear what you're doing. And then we then once we've looked at it and see it in the context of the rest of the changes, we can then talk about accepting.
right. You can approve each change before you can
And that's nice. It's nice to have.
review each change before it goes in. That makes sense. Perfect sense.
Exactly. So that's the lingo of GitHub.
Thank you for the education.
No
Now I
worries.
feel a little bit less silly. Well, just a little bit.
No problem. Okay. So again, thanks, Andrew, for all your input. Does anybody else also want to share any input they've had on on looking at this stuff?
I just wanted to mention something on Andrew's last comment about the tying the MAC addresses together to create a notion of an asset or an identity. That's a very hot topic with a number of different people in the OCA. It's something that we're working on in IBM. We haven't yet brought a proposal, haven't yet circulated it to the wider community yet, but we have the need for that in Sticks. So we've kind of gone and created a custom Sticks object for a notion of an asset and an event. And we're going to be bringing that forward to people soon. Because there's no standard in the industry to communicate that type of information to communicate asset inventory information with a cybersecurity context. It's desperately needed though for a lot of different use cases. I know Adam and I have talked about it in the past. So anyway, I think I look forward to that pretty soon. Sorry, sorry, Adam.
I'm glad to hear. No, I'm just glad to hear that. So yeah, it is definitely needed.
And the other thing also I wanted to also point out to you is I see David showed up. So David and Adam, you may help me here. There's a lot of questions I had on the right here about how the posture collection system fits in and how we talk to it. So I don't know if I do that offline, but I need help here on how does this thing talk to anything else and what kind of awareness do we have of it and that kind of stuff. Like I don't even know if it has a log.
Right. Yeah, that's probably a good offline discussion.
Yeah, offline. Yeah, I need help
for sure.
Yeah, I have no idea, but I was trying to lay it into the diagram, and I could figure out why we'd want to query it. But then I got into trouble with I've got these guys, these scanners that are going to have their own, notice of the posture, I guess, when they scan, and then how it relates to the posture agent this has, I have no idea. And so I'm trying to just figure out how to reconcile each of these different. We've got two scanners here, and then I assume this has a scanner.
For sure.
And I don't know it well enough to figure out how it all fits together. So I need help.
We've been having internal discussions with NIST on that also, and
Great. Thank you.
so I don't have a lot of input for you right now.
Okay, well, as long as it's an active conversation, that's all I need to know right now. Meanwhile, we can wrestle with these guys. And then Mark, for you down here, I did pull these, and as you saw, Andrew followed the crumbs that I laid out here. These came from the existing ontology. And I do know everybody that there's more to it than these things. I just tried to pull what was relevant in today's ontology into the diagram, but I'm very sure there are other actions and things that aren't here that I'm looking for you all to just tell me, either from a SIM point of view, a SOAR, or a threat intelligence system, other kinds of things that we need to communicate and action across these different components. I just took these because we had them, and I just wanted to point out that they existed. And it did spawn off a discussion that, as Andrew was having on, okay, yeah, we now need to go at the ontology and start looking at more details on the attributes that it has and the attributes it doesn't have and so forth.
Yep, makes sense.
Okay, so that's why I see hand in glove here as we go through this to identify these. So everybody else that is looking these times, I am looking for that kind of help. Other things, other actions that are taken between any of these and any of these that we're probably going to need ontology for. We already recognized that there was no ontology for kind of communicating to the posture collection system in a previous conversation I think Mitch had, but I'm sure there's more, and we just got to figure out what they are.
So this is Forrest again, and I'm going to drop in a minute for another phone call. I'm sorry, but we're using the term ontology a lot, and some of you know that's like my favorite term in the whole world. Some of you are happy about some, maybe not so happy. But I would just offer that if anyone who's actually interested in going forward in true ontology building, and they would interested in a standard to which we would actually build that, so in a very structured format, I'd be happy to give some overviews on how to do this stuff with basic formal ontology, and we could take a look at some ontologies that have already been developed that we can just pull from a lot of structure and add to maybe save some time and increase our chances of becoming even more interoperable with the community. I'll just offer that out there. Whoever's taking on this ontology building roles.
That is great. Yeah, what I'll work with you for is let me set up a call, and those that are interested can join. I think that'd be extremely valuable.
Yeah, that would be helpful.
I'll get with you, Forrest. Thank you. That's a great offer. I appreciate it. Yeah, that's a great
warning,
offer.
You have to bring your bottle of bourbon with you because it could possibly blow your brain. Just
should it be full or empty? But when I start the call.
Well, have the bottle there just in case you need to take the shots while we're talking.
It's the most exciting thing we're going to talk about, Forrest, I'm sure.
Okay.
Thank you, though, for that offer. I appreciate it.
You're welcome. And I'm gonna drop. Sorry, guys.
All right. And thanks for your input also, Forrest. And thanks for passing it by one of your colleagues.
No, that was helpful too for me to understand more of the where stick shifters going. I didn't appreciate it was that going to be that robust. So appreciate it.
Super.
Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay, anybody else have any other comments? Well, everybody's welcome. Any other comments in terms of what we have at this point? Again, feel free to lay issues against any of these diagrams or use cases.
Okay, so I'm going to ask a really stupid question, and I'm going to pull my new guy card here.
Yep. Yep.
The posture collection system, that thing off in the corner,
Yep.
that doesn't seem to be mentioned in the use cases or the ontology thus far. Do we have anything that talks about that? Because I have to admit that was something I kind of did a blind eye towards, because the only place that has existed that I've seen so far is in that diagram.
Yeah, that's right. So the ontology that's published out there currently was really just a very first draft at how we might structure it. It is completely void of, the breadth of technology categories and, functions. One of the things that we'll talk about in a couple of weeks, and I want to get with Forrest, but before then to get his input. But I'm going to take a pass at a draft of how, the categories and topics and functions, notifications, actions, commands, things like that, bringing in what exists from SCAP and OpenC2. And then I think our goal is to draw a straight line through those things, take everything that is common, where there are discrepancies, propose what the resolution might be in nomenclature and how we describe things. So you're not wrong, and it is missing.
And then I guess the other point that I'd make up on this question is the SCAP is where this posture collection system comes from. I don't know, Adam or Dave, I think you have a reference. Can you poke in the chat a reference where he can go to learn just the introduction to? I know we also had a video that we put on SCAP, didn't we, somewhere?
Just of presentations. Yes, I will get some links for that.
Awesome.
But basically, if you're doing SOAR and you're doing threat intelligence and event monitoring, you've got a body of endpoints, whether those are user endpoints or endpoints within the infrastructure. And so that's where vulnerabilities come from. So if you have threats coming in, they're going to exploit vulnerabilities, and the posture collection is the system that identifies what endpoints your system is composed of and what their security posture or what their vulnerability status is. And so that's where it fits. That's the purpose of having it in the system. We are having some we are sort of stalled on developing the specific capabilities of the PCS, and I apologize for that, but we need to get more detail, but it needs people with subject matter expertise to do that.
Okay, so it's mostly an asset analysis system for the most part.
Yes.
Okay.
And so I see IT asset management is not here along with SOAR and SIEM, but you're going to have assets in your system that you're working with. And so if you've got your IT assets, then they also have security postures associated with them.
Okay, makes sense. Cool.
Right. So one way this could interact with that system, that posture collection system, and I don't think things like this happen today, but something that could be possible is like if there's a piece of malware that that the bulk of this diagram happens to be able to detect, and a behavior of that malware is to take advantage of some specific configuration on a specific class of computing resource, the posture attribute system, the posture collection system rather, would have that information about which resources in the environment are configured appropriately or not, according to that thing, whatever that thing is that the malware takes advantage of. That could be one way that ties these two things together.
Another way that I've been kind of thinking about this, I don't know if anybody's had a chance to read the event modeling, content that I shared. It's eventmodeling.org, which I find really interesting. But, I've been thinking about the ontology potentially, comprehending kind of a given when then, such that if malware is seen or some asset is under suspicion of being compromised, then the posture should be published by that machine or be published by the collection system if it's already been collected. Like, really defining loose coupling kind of distributed systems architecture so that it doesn't have to be collected necessarily. When something happens, the posture of a given device should be published, right? Removing the need
Yes.
for, the orchestration, essentially.
Yes. That's so, I don't want to get too out of bounds here, but so the SCAP architecture, that posture collection system that's being worked on in the endpoint data collection group is actually predicated on work that started in the IETF in the security the security automation and continuous monitoring working group. And that was the intent all along, was to support decoupled everything, essentially, so that all of these assets could just publish whatever they needed to one or more repositories, and the information is just available when it's needed to be. It has some freshness associated with it, so if it's too old, you could go out and collect it, but generally speaking, you wouldn't need to. That's the whole idea behind it, and that's what another thing we're trying to push forward in the SCAP endpoint data collection group, is to design the architecture that's more, I guess, more cloud native friendly, if that makes sense, right? Like we want everything to be decoupled. We don't want single points of failure or all that kind of stuff.
Right, and we want to define this, distributed system. We know, and the goal of OCA, right, is to solve this problem of interoperability between all these heterogeneous things. So not getting too specific on what has to provide the posture or what has to collect the posture, just saying that, it should be published when these things happen, and when other things happen, maybe that's when we have to go retrieve it. But I really like this event modeling methodology. And was actually talking to the guy, Adam Dietrich, via LinkedIn. I reached out to him and was thinking if anybody's interested, maybe having him do a presentation for us and, see if he wants to contribute to the OCA.
I'd be down for that. I mean, I like the idea of being event driven. I mean, that's basically, I think in the IETF at one point there was one or more working groups. They were looking at this, and they had a different way to put it. It was basically event, context, action. So some event happens, and then there's context around that event, and then depending on what the event and the context is, some specific action is taken.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, this guy just describes it as given, when, then.
Yeah, that's awesome. It's great.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I really like his diagrams. I think that, thinking longer term as we go communicate what we're doing to, the public, to other organizations we want to bring into the OCA, across groups, it's a very effective way to communicate to people that are less technical, that they can understand, versus, bringing a C4 diagram up to a business person, their head might explode.
Yeah, yes, you're right.
There's another thing too that just came to my attention yesterday is this threat bus project. I'm not sure if folks noticed some of the chatter in the Slack, but a new a new participant became interested in the OCA. He set up a call. I set up a call with him to introduce each other next week. But they have an open source project called Threat Bus that is all based on Stix2 real-time messaging, and it seems very interesting. So I'm gonna find out a little bit more about it next week. But it's another project I would just say take a look at to people.
Yeah, it looks like it's 0M2 based, which would make sense for what you were talking about earlier with it being event driven. I mean, the bus is essentially your message broker there.
Yeah, I was looking at it. It looks like they're using Rabbit right now. But yeah, I mean, and I don't know probably any more than you do, Andrew. I just took a brief look through it. Gonna find out more next week, but they're very interested in being involved in the OCA.
Cool.
He reached out to me on LinkedIn, so that could get interesting because it's already all an open source project. So
Hey, just a quick comment. Sorry to interrupt. I noticed, Jason, thank you, by the way, that you put the link to the SACM architecture also in the chat, along with a whole bunch of other links that David's putting in there and Mark. Just a comment on that SACM architecture. Bill and I are still working on an update to that. I'm not sure exactly when it'll be published, maybe in a few weeks or something like that. So we can let this group know when that happens as well.
Good. Hey, let us know.
how much of that SACM is how many? Let's start with the components. How many of the components are represented here? How many are we missing?
In this specific diagram,
We have other
we-
diagrams. Yeah, we have other diagrams for that, don't we?
Yeah.
I'm just
so,
wondering,
I mean,
do we have any document that is like a list, not just diagrams, but like just a list of the components?
oh, I haven't seen one of those.
Because I don't think we have an all-encompassing one, right?
Right, that's true. I doubt it. Where were they? They were here somewhere.
Yeah, so this has the orchestrator.
Orchestrator and the collection service and the endpoints down here. There's a posture collection service endpoint here.
Is that SACM or is
So Bill might be able to describe more about what we have in the SACM architecture than I can, because he's been more frequently than I have anyway, actually updating the draft. This what you're looking at here, I believe, is how we thought we would integrate, and this was very early on when we first came into
yes.
OCA, I think, right? Like, this is what we thought we would be able to include from the SACM world into what OCA already had conceived. The one other thing that I'll mention is that SACM, while it was born out of posture assessment, which really at the time that working group started was supposed to include things like vulnerability status, software load, and configuration. The architecture itself was being designed so that it could be extended to other subdomains in the cybersecurity area, such as, SIM or EDR or SOAR or what have you, right? But we were starting with posture assessment to lay that foundation.
Makes
Right.
sense.
Yeah, the intention was to be a collection point for any type of security data.
Yes, correct. So if you wanted an idea about the components that are in the SACM architecture, they're roughly equivalent to what you'll find in the SCAP architecture. They're slightly different, but not terribly so.
So we
I've
do
got a
have
question
these.
about this diagram. Do we
This is
think
an
that,
old this is an old diagram, so let's not.
okay,
Yeah,
all right.
let me find the newer ones. Where are the newer ones are out here?
The newer ones in here are going to be more SCAP specific than they represent SACM.
Oh, okay.
Because we originally we originally actually mislabeled some of these as SACM instead of SCAP.
That's true. Yeah.
So then we started switching them back. So, and anyway, and I know it makes it more confusing for everybody, and I apologize about that. But
This is from November. It's relatively recent. Yeah.
yeah,
There's SACM there. Yeah.
yeah. But that's basically it, right? Like we have this idea that there's some orchestrator. And I understand, Andrew, you mentioned like, let's try to figure out a way where we could obsolete the need for an orchestrator. I mean, that would be fantastic if we could do that. I'm totally on board for that. But then, yeah, all the blue parts here are essentially SACM things that we've been talking about. And this is where I'll need Bill, that in the architecture draft, we talk about these components and possibly, I think there are other components as well, like more specialized components and the workflows between them and the interfaces that they require. And I think we have them detailed, if not in the published draft, it'll be in the draft, that the version that we publish next. The additional information about, how topics are actually structured, what payloads they expect to have, that sort of thing.
Yeah, that's stuff that I think that, the ontology should comprehend as well.
Yeah.
Because my question here is, do we think that the security data fabric and integration services are different thing?
So yeah, so this question has come up a number of times. So the what is trying to be illustrated here, and I'm starting to feel like we need to take this and add a whole bunch of text to it. It probably should be something I should try to do. What that's trying to show, Mark, is so we've got the security data fabric, which is this currently the Stick Shifter project, which is doing all the data federation between all the different anything that can anything that's a repository, basically, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then you've got things that are querying that and things that are bringing the data back. And that can be called by the integration service. So in order to use that, you can use it via the integration service. But the integration service itself is not the data fabric. The data fabric is a thing that you call via that integration service in addition to all of the other arrows. So, I mean, one of the things that we used to talk about with this diagram is the purpose of trying to drill into this stuff is every arrow you see here is something that should be in the ontology.
Yep.
Right. And this is really, to me, something that can be the North Star for what we should be trying to do for the Rev 1. It's like, because every one of these is a data flow that we should be trying to say, okay, as an industry, can we agree on what this data flow looks like? Because it's extremely important. It's important enough that it's being used in the IETF and in NIST and in these various functions, right? So yeah, that was the purpose of this, but did I answer your question or?
Yeah.
And I think I think we, this diagram is kind of old still, right? Like, I think we need to update it with.
Yep, it's on my list of to-dos. I've been asking.
Yeah, I know
absolutely.
you've been asking me. I know I've been dropping the ball. But
it does need to be updated. Yeah, this was like a year ago, I think, that we touched this thing. Yeah.
What we need to do is update this with the latest outputs from the C4 work, and also, like we were saying earlier, align this with what is going on in the SCAP working group. Like, this stuff here is based on last year of that.
Yep.
And things have changed.
Yep.
I believe, anyway.
I think you're right. Yeah. Okay, does anybody have anything else? I'm kind of at the end of my list of things. I said I'm looking for input for the other diagrams still from all of you that haven't given me yet. Just as I said, send me an email, put an issue in the GitHub on these diagrams. I am expecting more things that could be happening out of the sim. I was going to start putting a SOAR one together and a threat intelligence one together as center stage. Again, I'm trying to do each one individually, so I don't get so many freaking arrows all over the place. It's getting very confusing to try and read. So this is really the sim-centric view, and then I want to do a source-centric and a threat intelligence-centric view. So I need some help from you.
Have you sent this to Arctic Wolf?
Yes.
Okay. Haven't heard anything back yet?
Not yet. No, but they were looking at it. Yeah.
Okay.
Yep. They definitely have it on the list of things to look at.
So I have one thought on SIM. This, some work I've been doing internally at MACV lately. That's a longer story, but my thought is really that we should decompose SIM, and that data acquisition, or connecting to a data source and mapping to that data source like Stick Shifter does, that should be part of the integration service and not necessarily the responsibility of SIM. Many more things than SIM need access to data, and historically, obviously, SIM has been this, collector of everything, logs and events. But I really think that needs to change, and I think I see some organizations out there trending that direction of kind of an open data platform that an analytic could sit on top of, correlation things can sit on top of it.
Yeah, I agree with you. The decomposing, Mark, also is there's a lot of different types of data that come into a SIM, and we probably want to decompose what those are. There's everything from logs that coming in there, the stick shifters of queries. Some of these take vulnerability data, some are doing behavior analytics, yada yada. There's all sorts of different data that the SIM takes in for various reasons that also could be used in other places.
Yeah, it's going to be a really big list.
Yes. Yeah. That's the problem. It's a big list. Yeah. It's kind of the catch-all right now, isn't it?
But it's, when I think about it, it's like, a sensor or a control that's doing logging, it should publish and make available for query the things that it can see, or the things that it knows, the things that it can do, which is, in kind of layman's terms, how I think about the ontology is, what can a thing see? What does it know? What can it do? Is what we want to define. And whether it's a SIM that collects it or something else, I think we need looser coupling than traditional SIM architecture.
I hear you. Yeah, I hear you. Okay, so if you want, I'll try. I could start that. I'll instead of going to the SOAR threat intelligence, I can do a one-step decompose and get a lot of help from all the rest of you guys on the SIM and all the different types of data that it has pulling into it. All right. Yeah. I also had to. Yeah. Go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, I like what Mark said. One thing that I'd emphasize really for every component of the system is I guess, two questions. One, what can you do? And the other is, what can you provide? And don't necessarily emphasize what you can consume, because the sim will consume whatever you give it, right? It's like it'll act like a data warehouse, and that doesn't necessarily mean anything from an analyst perspective. Like, okay, so you're housing all this data, maybe you can visualize it, maybe you can't. The sims in general have a tendency to want to act like the gatekeeper for all the data, right? You shove everything into me, and then we'll shove out other data streams, and we'll put a line to your tip, and we'll put a line to your SOAR, what have you. But just saying you can consume a thing isn't really. I'll just say, from my perspective, it isn't really a desirable function unless you can actually act on it, right? So maybe we define those actions as, what can you do? What service can you provide? What can you export to somebody else? And make those kind of the first class attributes that define, the role of a device. I don't know if that makes sense. Sorry.
No, yeah, I think it does.
I think there's a corollary to that, I think, Andrew, is that also some of that data the SIM's getting is also replicated and sent somewhere else because it needs it too. And there's always that syndrome of that data gets sent to 5 different places.
Yeah, I think that's one of the essential problems is, SIM has been struggling to scale across multi-cloud, hybrid cloud. Just the data volumes are going to continue to increase, and centralization of it, I don't see is sustainable. We have to know where the data is and have a really good mapping of what things can see what events, and how is their data formed. And that, I think, needs to be comprehended and mapped at a higher level, a registry, if you will, of the security distributed systems architecture, so that when, if I need it, I know where to get it and I know how I'm going to get it back.
Well, yeah. So, I don't know if we could go back to the other diagram, but that is what is supposed to be being reflected there, right? So that telemetry ingestion / sense making bracket theme box, there's a reason why that's a little bit so vague. And it's because in this diagram, right, you'll notice that SIM is just a tiny little piece. It's not the center here. And that can be more than one. So there could be 5 of those yellow boxes. There could be 10, right, that are doing various different things. And that thing, if it's ingesting data, is doing sense making, and it's also got the data store. But the key is that it's tied to that fabric, right? So if you want to ask questions about the data, you go to that data fabric, and then it goes to all of the other yellow boxes. So it knows how to talk to the 10 different yellow boxes there, right? So that's, maybe it needs to be made more clear, but that's kind of the concept here, is that there's many of those. So maybe I should put kind of multiple stacked.
Yeah, you should multiple stack this.
Obvious. You could do the same with the EDRs. There should be multiple stacked.
That'd be good if you reference that as multiple.
Yeah. Well, okay, so silly question. Aside from the color, what's the difference between the sense-making analytics framework and the sense-making SIM telemetry ingestion? Because I consider most SIMs to have some level of analytics embedded in them as well.
Yeah, good question. So that there, it's because there's kind of like 2 levels, right? So below, you have analytics that's happening on data when it's ingested, whereas above, you have higher level analytics that's happening across all the data. So the stuff that's happening below is only happening on the data that was sent to it, whereas the stuff that's happening above is happening across all the yellow boxes. So it's happening across the SIMs, the EDRs, anything that's connected through. So it's a little bit more asynchronous, right? That's why it's tied to. You can see it's tied through to threat intel. It's tied through to this detection collaboration aspect.
Some special analytics in here as well.
They're both tied through to the detection analytics collaboration. Just one arrow goes up and one arrow goes down.
That might be a mistake. Yeah. Anyway, but I think so. I mean, and to make it clear, Andrew, like this is all very much up for debate, right? So don't.
Sure.
Yeah. So
You're welcome.
all this is this is Milton clay, not in stone. So very welcome to your feedback here. This is what the thought pattern was at the time.
Well, you were wrestling multiple independent standards, just trying to relate them together.
Yeah. A lot of this is that, you know, we're trying to pull together all these different things, right? Like that sense making, those are all, that's from IACD.
Right.
And
then these industry functions, Yeah, I think
it makes sense. I'm just trying to kind of reconcile things because it what you said about the bottom stuff being more what I would consider transactional versus kind of stateful up above. You know, it makes perfect sense. I would just, if that's the case, I would try to find some way of illustrating the state, right? If the red guy has a larger corpus of data that he's acting on, like, you know, have that being a big old arrow going in, so you show that he's got more info than the guy below.
Get down
Sorry,
here,
now I'm going completely tangential.
Certainly is a challenge representing it graphically, isn't it?
I have a broad question there. This is Doug, and Russ, saw your emails this week. First time in about 3 months I've been able to come around.
Yeah, they've drowned you. Yeah, welcome back.
Slightly drowned. Hi, Mark. It's been since December.
I know. Hey, Doug.
A very quick story. You know, but a long time ago, I was doing work for the FBI, and I worked for one of two companies. Back then, I worked for the first company, and we got 2/3 of a system done. The second company, I now work for that company, by the way, got called in front of Congress because the FBI and SCIC tried to build a case filing system for the Bureau because we were forward looking. The Bureau wanted to build case filing, and yet when we went back to figure out how to build it, we were so forward looking that we envisioned so much that we couldn't build it. They spent $170 million trying. That program's trilogy, and it was an ugly mess because $170 million got put down and said, we're going to have to start over. We envisioned so much. Now, I'm not saying that's what's happening here, but I don't think you all want us to draw what we're doing and have been doing. We're trying to draw some of the future, right? How do we know how far forward is too far to go forward with those ideas? I mean, wouldn't it be awesome if there was an enterprise bus running down the middle of a SOC and all of us could graft our indices and our search tools and things on, and SIM could be distributed? I hear that statement, and I'm like, whoa, that's awesome. But I'm not that software architect. I'm a consumer of software. I'm an integrator. Sorry, I don't build software. But I hear something like that and go, wow, are we getting so far ahead that we can't actually build that? How does our process here let us arrive at practical, achievable, without getting too far over the skis that we can't build that?
Yeah, I'm trying to figure out an answer to that. I mean, some of this, because some of this does exist, some of it isn't widely deployed. And you know, also, we're not trying to tell people how to build their products. That's not our job. I think what we're trying to do, you know, this has nothing to do with how you should build any of these boxes.
Right.
It's how all the boxes should talk to each other. Like every one of these boxes, while there are some products that cover multiple boxes in this picture, there are also many that only cover one. And it's like every one of these things is a potential product someone could be buying or building or deploying, right? So how do they all work together? You know, to your point, Doug, as an integrator, right? How can we plug these things together? I think, you know, I agree. We don't want to lean over. It's very easy sometimes these conversations to get too far ahead of ourselves. We do need to kind of refocus and focus on. To me, it'd be great to take this diagram and write down a name for each arrow. What is that? And then can we take that name and map it to something that already exists in either OpenC2 or SCAP or ICD and use that name, right? Then we should almost have a V1 or V0.1 of what these messages should look like, or at least what the messages should, what they are, and then we can define what they would look like.
And that maybe feels like capturing what the state of the industry is now.
Right.
So that we can challenge it and go, wow, let's make SimTools a lot better. I mean, wouldn't it be awesome if they could all search across each other product? You could buy a logger, you could buy a SimTool, you could buy the best SimTool on the planet, but that one's really expensive, so let's buy this one over here instead. And we could all search together. That would be awesome if they could talk to each other. They don't want to.
Right. Yeah, exactly. I think, you know, as far as futures, I think we shouldn't put any limits on what we look towards. But certainly we have, you know, I totally agree, Doug. We have to get something done. So which pieces of it we choose to tackle first, you know, I think that makes sense, but I don't think we should limit. You know, I think from an interoperability perspective, you know, the thing I always think about is the ideal is that one integration service straight through the middle, and it's connect once, reuse everywhere. You know, when an event is published, it's, you know, produce once, consume many times. You know, some of those core, you know, fundamental things that we could define in the OCA as our upfront design. And we know, you know, distributed systems that, you know, everybody in the security industry, you know, as far as I know, is doing agile development and developing to user stories and features and things. But without upfront design, you know, agile will never accomplish a distributed system.
I appreciate the thoughts there. Didn't mean to throw too much of a stinker out there of a question. I just, as I'm trying to get a little connected back in here, and you know, are we looking at tomorrow or today? Comes to mind as a question. You know, the use cases, Russ, where I spent a little time. I see they've grown up a little bit, and you know, when you asked me about others, I didn't even know where we were.
Okay, well, fair enough. Yep, that's right. Well, hopefully you got some more bandwidth. We could use your help, Doug.
I mean, I think we're looking at tomorrow, and I think that, you know, in my mind, OCA, the thing that we produce will be adapters to today's technologies, today's APIs that adapt those monolith things to the tomorrow architecture that, you know, we're defining.
And thereby eliminating a lot of point-to-point communication, duplicating data, or reformatting it over and over again.
Yeah, I mean, things like stick shifter, right? I mean, you know, it's a great example of something that the OCA could produce that we don't care what your schema is, you know, we're going to do bidirectional transformation of whatever that is.
Mhm.
And, now we can federate search across all of these things. It doesn't mean that the proprietary doesn't still exist, but the OCA architecture, I think as members, we should push our organizations to conform to what we define, but we should also, we know that that's not going to happen universally. And I think our output could be adapters to the other things and open, little wrappers and connector apps and things that put all this together.
Okay, guys, I apologize. I didn't realize how far over the time limit I was here, guys. I apologize for that. Great discussion today. I really appreciate everybody's attendance, and welcome back some of you that have been here a while, and thank you very much for those that have been here for the first time. We'll resume this discussion in a couple weeks, but again, don't forget to continue your inputs. I'll keep dialoguing with you, keep editing and updating, putting issues against what we have out there. And I'll write up the meeting minutes and I'll send the recording out to the YouTube channel we have. So you can, if you want to play anything back or you want to see what I've highlighted as the next actions, they'll be in those notes. Okay, anybody else have some final thoughts or discussion?
No, thanks a lot, Russell.
Thank you, everybody. Thanks so much.
Okay, thank you.
Bye-bye.
See you guys.
Bye-bye.